Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. Monsignor Kupke, welcome back.
Thank you. We should acknowledge some of our listening audience, I think. So maybe a shout out to Deacon George Forshey down on the Jersey Shore, who connected during the past week and said he's enjoying Coffee with Kupke.
That's good.
And one of the seminarians from Seton Hall, Joe Grabowski, who drove to see his parents over Christmas and listened to every one of our episodes nonstop.
All 30.
Driving down to Florida.
37, yeah. I just met somebody on one of our weekend experiences here, a couples retreat, who asked for a Coffee with Kupke mug. So I wanted to mention that we have a smaller version of the large Coffee with Kupke mug available for those of you who would like to have one and make a little donation. So you can...
Folks, these are collector's items.
You can email me if you're interested at pmanning@patersondiocese.org, and maybe Joe can put that on the screen. So we left with Casey allegedly taking a survey of who would be interested in a Catholic paper.
Yes.
But I think he probably stuffed the ballot box.
I think so.
Okay.
Well, the fact that he was not here a year when the Beacon went to press for the first time.
So he had this. Up to now, the Diocese of Paterson was sharing its news through the Advocate in conjunction with the Archdiocese of Newark.
Right. We had what they called a Paterson editor of the Archdiocesan paper, and
he included Paterson stories.
Yeah.
So you say that he allowed Father Paul Langua,
yes,
and a gentleman named Jerry Costello,
yeah,
to start this whole thing. And it looks to me that like he stole Costello at least from the Advocate.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So,
and much later on, under Rodimer, Costello will be stolen by Cardinal Cook to found a archdiocesan paper for New York, which had never had one.
Wow. And what was the name of that?
Catholic New York.
Oh, and is it still going?
I don't think
Probably
it is.
Not.
No.
Yeah. So there was also maybe some conversation about the name. Who came up with the name? How did that happen?
I'm not sure how the Beacon came up.
Whether it was Casey or
Yeah.
Okay. And he wrote a column regularly.
Well, he had already been writing the column for years at that point. He wrote a column for his Cathedral Parish Bulletin.
Oh.
Every single week, and had been doing that for years. So it was no big deal to pick it. No. They talk about in Rochester that, like, for example, when as auxiliary bishop, he went off to the council. He just handed his secretary 20 bulletin.
My goodness! Wow. I wrote bulletin articles when I was the pastor at St. Philip's in Clifton. I'm not sure. I think I did it almost every week, but if I missed a week, it wasn't the end of the world.
Yeah.
But just knowing the work that goes into that, the wordsmithing,
yes,
that is a monumental task.
In some ways, the pressure that he's left for his three successors, all of whom have felt one way or another
that they had to do this.
I have to continue this.
Yeah, and his column was called By the Way.
By the Way.
But then they were all collected into a book.
Not all of them, but the best of them were collected into a book called The Heart Remembers Too.
And I'm sure you have a copy in the archives?
Yeah. It was published by Paulus Press. And he won several awards for his column.
Was the book published after he died?
No, actually, I think it was published during his lifetime.
I remember my mother having a copy.
Yeah. Casey was a very disciplined character, so he had note cards filled with stories and anecdotes, and on different topics, neatly arranged by alphabetically, and so for him it was he liked writing. He would go. Unlike any of his successors, he would leave the Chancery office at noon. He would have all his appointments in the morning, and then at noon he would go home to Durham Avenue, have lunch, and spend the rest of the day there writing his correspondence and his column and his other written material. To the point where in his time, the diocese had a second secretary at the house.
Oh, wow. And who was that?
I've forgotten her name.
Yeah.
When Casey died, we kind of had to find a position for her in the Chancery setup because Rhode Island was not going to operate that way.
In some ways, what you're saying about Casey reminds me of Bishop Serratelli, in that Bishop Serratelli everybody always wonders where he gets the anecdotes that he uses in his homilies. He always has some way into the reading through an anecdote.
I asked Serratelli that one time, and he said to me that every time he goes into a bookstore, he said there's a section that has this type of book, and he goes and sees if there's anything he doesn't have, and he buys it.
Wow. Yeah. And he also would, I don't know if the schedule was as disciplined as Bishop Casey's, but he would spend time writing and working at Durham Avenue.
Yes.
Yeah, similarly. So Casey begins the pre-Senate.
Yes.
And the Sisters' Council?
Sisters' Council, yes.
The Diocesan Lay Council?
It's a wonder we didn't have a Brothers' Council for the 8 brothers.
Oh, yeah. But so he calls this a second synod to implement the reform of Vatican II.
Right.
And
that's given to Father John Couture to organize that.
Right. And it's the first one since 1943.
Right.
And it lasts for 2 years. And it had commissions. I have priests, sisters, lay persons, and 1,500 speak-up sessions.
Right. In parishes,
Yeah, so I think we thought the synod on synodality process was, novel, but here you have something similar happening.
Yeah, and much of it the result of Vatican II. There was so much confusion, but also possibility, energy. So how are we going to organize that? What do we have to change? What programs, what projects do we have to look for the future? It did not bear the fruit, I think, that Casey hoped for. A lot of people were involved in it, but today it's almost a non-issue. On a rare occasion, I will dig out of the archives one of the several hundred copies of the synodal report that we have.
Gosh, I'd love to see that.
And, you look at it and you say, none of this
happened.
Well, things were moving so fast that things were obsolete.
Oh, you said that once before. Yeah. What year did you graduate high school?
65.
So do you remember this process? Do you remember this process taking place, or were you in school and unaware?
No, I was in the seminary. Well, by the time it...
So you I mean, this sounds monumental. I mean, our synodal process was not as long, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah, it was monumental, and involved an awful lot of people. It was a good thing in the sense that it brought many people together to talk about, the directions of the diocese.
Yeah.
Probably made a whole generation of Catholics aware of the existence of the diocese as an entity.
Yes, interesting.
It started forcing people in Passaic County to think about Morris County and vice versa.
Yeah. I talk about this in the parish administration course that, theologically, the church is the universal church first, then the particular church of the diocese, and then the parish is a subset of the diocese. Experientially, people understand the church in the opposite way.
Right.
It's my local parish, vaguely aware of the diocese, and of the universal church as well.
Yeah.
You're going to be shocked that one of the main themes that emerged from the synod was the need for communication.
Yes, and
we still talk about that all the time.
Well, it was as a result of that a diocesan communication office and center, at one point over on the other side of Morristown, we had the barn attached to Good Shepherd Center set up as a diocesan communications office.
Okay, wow.
To look back at it today, it seems almost primitive, because what they were doing there was recording tapes.
Not like our studio. Sorry.
Not podcasts, but recording
video. Not video.
No, not video. Audio tapes, and things like that. Like we have in the archives a whole box of audio tapes from that era, and I have no idea how we would play them.
Are they on reels?
Yes, yeah.
Joe could figure it out.
Joe's smiling here. He's just been alerted to the fact of a treasure trove somewhere he didn't know about.
Yeah. So the Good Shepherd Center was run by sisters, yes?
Yes, but the diocese took over
They had a barn there.
A barn, garage, whatever you wanted to call it. And this is also the first training center for the permanent diaconate. The permanent diaconate classes took place in that structure.
Bishop Casey is the one who implemented the permanent diaconate.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it goes back a ways.
Yeah. Casey was wide open in many ways. And, in a sense, it was perhaps good that he had a diocese that he knew nothing about, because he wasn't restricted by any history,
preconceptions.
Right.
Yeah.
It was
like Bishop Sweeney coming here, and not really having any preconceived notions.
Yeah.
In spite of this proliferation of offices and commissions. At one point you say some of the priests thought of the diocese as having a bloated bureaucracy and an elite class of people in special ministry. But at the same time, Casey was careful or exercised caution. And you say, unlike Bishop Nava, he was cautious about new parishes.
He was cautious about spending money.
Oh, okay. That's what it was. He was worried about it.
Well, he didn't want to put us in debt. He didn't want to see everybody. It was a strange time because people were not sure what to build or how to build.
Yes, because of the changes.
Because of the changes. So it was like a 10-year period in which we basically. When I wrote the Living Stones, I was able in the back to put a photograph of a church built in every decade from the 1850s up to the 1980s, except for this decade.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
There were no new churches built under Casey.
Yes, and You mentioned because people weren't quite sure what to do with the liturgical reform, but people were talking back then of floating parishes.
Yeah, it was not just the building, but even the very notion of a parish. What would that mean? Would they all be personal parishes, floating parishes,
Amazing.
Parishes by attraction?
Well, so as I was reading that section, I was thinking to myself of a document that has come out under Pope Francis, I think in 2020, little known, called The Pastoral Conversion of the Parish Community, or something like that. And in that document, at the beginning and at the end, the question is raised, how do we do parish as we move into the 21st and 22nd century? Yeah. And some of these ideas are suggested in that document. And then, of course, there's a middle section that kind of limits what you can do by quoting canon law. So there's like this visionary beginning and end, and then
but you still have boundaries, and you're still responsible.
You can't do this, that, and the other thing. Yeah. So anyway, I was struck by the fact that people were thinking about this in the 1960s, how to do parish.
Yeah, very much so. For example, there were a few communities of attraction, if you will, that emerged in the diocese, like at William Paterson University, for example.
Yes, Father Lou Skirty.
Right. Well, even before Lou, with John Werlin and those guys. So, that was becoming like a quasi-parish.
Got it.
Because it was not a parish, and yet there were people going there every Sunday. St. Mary's Abbey.
I was just going to mention that. Yeah, the same thing happened.
And also the Trinitarians in Sterling.
Yes.
So
people
there was some of
identifying.
that. There was some of that going on, and it called into question. Well, what do we build for this? So the two classic structures that were built in this period, because they had to be built because they didn't have anything, were Annunciation in Wayne and Corpus Christi in Chatham Township. And, both of them built, at Nava's direction.
Yes. Oh, so Nava had started the ball rolling.
Yeah, similar structures that could be a church, and then you move a few walls, and then it's a gym, and then it's a meeting hall, and then,
Yeah, so Corpus Christi, I can remember going there in my early priesthood, and I think the church and
there was a chapel with a back wall that could be collapsed, and then the altar turned around facing into the gym for Sunday worship.
Right.
And Annunciation had the same thing.
Okay, now I remember, yeah. Well, Corpus Christi since then has a new church.
Yes, and Annunciation has completely eliminated all of the temporariness of that structure and made it more permanent. I
think the last parish that was founded before Casey's era was a Corpus Christi. I say he allowed Corpus Christi and appointed Steve Patch as the pastor.
Right.
And St. Thomas More
in Conversation.
And he appointed,
which is the parish right here.
Yeah, Father Frank Feenan.
Right.
And so those were the last two. Is that right? The last two?
Those were the last two in that area, before Redeemer came. Yeah.
And then I have...
And St. Thomas More was, they were picketing against building the church.
This story, yeah. So he got pickets, people upset. Oh, they were called something sensitivity, the Committee for Cultural Sensitivity or something. Right. I can't remember.
They basically objected to building a new church directly in front of an existing church. In their mind, the Mother House Chapel of the Sisters of Charity should become the parish church. We do not need still another church. And
they called themselves the New Jersey Committee for Sensitivity.
Yes. Yeah. And they picketed the groundbreaking of Thomas More. And meanwhile, in Frank Feenan's mind, he says, I've got a parish here. I need a facility. And no one, of course, asked the sisters if they wanted to give up their chapel to,
right.
But,
so was the parish community having Mass in the mother house?
I guess they did for a little while.
Yeah, maybe that's why they thought so. So,
basically, the Thomas More property was purchased from the nuns.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right across from the hotel.
Yeah,
right by the train station. Then I have, I guess he elevated some missions to parish status.
Yes, St. Jude's in Hamburg.
St. Jude's Hopatgang.
Yeah.
St. Jude Bud Lake.
Yeah.
How come we have 3 St. Judes?
Well, because St. Jude was a popular saint.
Okay. Probably one of the least known of the apostles.
Right.
But yeah.
That's made him very popular. He's the apostle of the patron saint of hopeless cases.
Yes.
So who doesn't have one of those?
That's true. That's true. Good point.
But also there had been, connecting it to an earlier era of the diocese, there had been a very, very, very popular devotion to St. Jude at Our Lady of Victories in downtown Paterson.
Yes,
so
now I remember.
this spreads out into the hinterlands a little bit.
You also
but they were also, they were all founded by pastors as missions of their parish. So they kind of got to name.
Okay.
So they're not thinking in terms of, we've already got a Jude over there and a Jude over there. They're just saying, I want a Jude.
Yeah, and maybe they're thinking this mission is a hopeless case. Anyway, he elevated Our Lady of the Mountain, Our Lady of Mount Carmel Swartzwood, Star of the Sea, St. Thomas probably up in
Oak Ridge.
Oak Ridge, okay. So,
but again, that plays into the increased manpower that he had available to staff these places.
Priests ready.
Yeah, so he has more priests available, but at the same time, the religious orders had not started withdrawing from places. So at this point, they still staff something like 15 parishes in the diocese.
Yeah.
Far more than they do today.
Right.
And so
he needed places to put guys.
Yeah, he had
available personnel.
Yeah.
Next, we're in the middle of Bishop Casey's tenure here at the Diocese of Paterson, and when we come back, we'll be completing his time with us here in the diocese.